Hello, hello, and welcome back to Bearing Birth, a birth story podcast highlighting the emotional impact of birth, the immediate postpartum period, and the years beyond. I'm Jordan, a doula specializing in postpartum support.
And I'm Sophie, a perinatal mental health therapist. Today we have a fellow podcaster on. We are talking with Rashida Quinn, who is the sister-in-law of one of our previous guests, Jules and Garrett. Rashida is the program director of the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, also known as ABNAO. Rashida is also the host of two podcasts, the most recent being Black Care Matters and another podcast she did a while back called Dark Matters, both which are linked in our description below. Rashida is also a former doula, poet, and fierce advocate for restorative justice.
Rashida is also a mother of 2 young children and is here to share with us the birth stories of her daughters. In part 1 of our conversation, Rashida talks with us about the great sacrifice and challenges she experienced being pregnant and the adjustment going from 1 to 2 young children, including weaning her toddler from breastfeeding and co-sleeping. She shares what it was like to introduce her 2 babies and integrate together as a family of 4.
Rashida also briefly talks about her successful experience using IUI as a method of conception with both of her children.
She discusses how a supportive team consisting of Black women and her partner were instrumental in keeping her grounded and safe during labor and birth. In this episode, we discuss how systemic racism affects every aspect of life and how it especially contributes to the high maternal mortality rates for Black women.
Thank you so much, Rashida, for coming and chatting with us. Please enjoy part 1 of our conversation, and we will see you again on October 16th for part 2, where we talk to Rashida about her postpartum experience.
A doula and a therapist are sitting down to talk about birth. A doula and a therapist are sitting down to talk about birth.
Well, thank you, Rashida, so much for coming today. We're so excited to hear your story and just have you here and chat together.
Yeah.
Before we start with your birth story, do you want to talk a little bit about the podcast you've been involved with? We'd love to share it with our listeners.
Yeah. I have been able to be a part of creating a podcast for a local nonprofit called the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon. ABNAO is what they go by. And they created a season of stories of Black nurses throughout the Pacific Northwest, sharing what it has been like to be in that profession in this part of the country and how racism has played a part in their profession and in their workspace. And it's a beautiful collection of stories that haven't been told before in this way. So it's been an honor to hold space for that.
That's amazing.
You release episodes once a month, and people can find you Black Care Matters on Instagram, and if you put it in Spotify and Apple Podcasts and anything, right?
Yeah. All of those things in www.blackcarematters.org, and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
What made you want to start a podcast or be involved with this project? Are you a nurse yourself?
No, I am a program director. So I found myself managing projects for a nonprofit that was serving Black nurses through a connection with a friend initially, and stayed a part of their work for a very long time. So I found myself as a nurse advocate, essentially, and helping support this nonprofit to grow. And I think it just aligns with a lot of my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion and restorative justice that is about creating space and advancing the lexicon around what it means to hold the Black identity in a white supremacist society, and to do it for nurses, such a important part of our healthcare system. Like, our healthcare system holds such a huge pain body of racism and different realities based on where you fall within the construct of white supremacist ideals. So it was a natural project for me, and kind of in line with all of the ways I orient myself and have values around what I participate in creating.
Was it the first time that you had done a podcast before?
It was actually the second time that I'd done a podcast. I did a similar format of long form interviews without much editing at all when Trump got elected, and was reaching out to BIPOC folks in Portland to ask how they were feeling. Cause I realized that as soon as Trump got elected, there was this like big shock, I think, in the white community around what like a new narrative about a story that they had told themselves wasn't really happening got exposed in this shocking way.
It's happening again now.
And it's happening again now. And so as soon as that was happening, it just, that experience of shock for like white folks was taking up so much of the story of what it was to be alive at that time. And I realized that as a person of color, I was finding it difficult to even find space to experience what I was experiencing. And I imagined that other people of color were feeling the same. So created a show talking about that then.
What's that one called?
It's actually called Dark Matters. There's been a theme. And yeah, that was sort of a passion project between my husband and I. So yeah, collecting these narratives of what it's like, I think is been a way in which I process and progress through the kind of change I want to be a part of.
Talking, storytelling.
It's so powerful. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You're here to tell your birth stories and share what pregnancy was like for you. You can share a little bit about your fertility journey if you'd like to.
You have 2 kids?
I do. Yeah.
How old are they?
I have Zaharia, who is almost 2.5. Her birthday is March 12th, 2022. And Avani, who's almost 4 months. Her birthday is April 17th of this year.
So you have like a pretty recent birth experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's totally up to you if you want to talk about both of your births or one of them. Some people who have multiple kids will sort of like touch on each one and how they're different from each other. So you could either start with like your first pregnancy or this most recent pregnancy and sort of talk about what pregnancy was like. And then we'll get into like getting closer to your birth experience on whichever one you're excited to share about.
Well, this past pregnancy was hard. It felt long. And yeah, I think it's not my favorite thing to be pregnant. And I have very much wanted to be a mom and be a part of this experience of creating family. And the actual pregnancy experience has been really difficult. And this last time, mentally hard to keep my head in the game. And then you have the dynamic of a toddler. So there wasn't a lot of pause and reflecting. Like the first pregnancy, you have more time before you multiply in yourself. It's like such a big change to go from 0 to 1. And so
you have time to like reflect on what that really means.
Right.
Without entertaining a toddler constantly.
Yeah, right. So this time it felt faster. It felt like a time in the pregnancy would come along like a milestone and you're like, oh, okay, that's where I'm at, as opposed to like tracking every week and like being super, I felt like it was harder to be more, not maybe, yeah, just a different time of what it meant to be present, I think, with what was happening, and so tired. And so, yeah, pregnancy itself is kind of a struggly, sweet thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's both.
What was so hard about it for you with the 2 of them?
I think being sick for a long time with both of them. So it was like very nauseous until like 21 or 22 weeks with both of them.
How do you do that with a toddler?
So gross. Yeah.
It's so hard to
you
just
don't
live your
feel
life.
good. Being like so many different body shapes over the course of 2 years and breastfeeding until I got pregnant. And then I was like, oh no, this is like not my thing. Having both of you, one person growing and one person eating was just too much. It was like,
that's a lot.
Yeah.
Needed to have an abrupt move away from that. Which
How was the weaning process?
It was fine, actually. I mean, it it doesn't stand out as I think about it now as the most challenging thing. We were co-sleeping, and that was a lot more challenging. We like paid for support, which I'm glad we did, because that also felt like it needed to change once I was pregnant.
Support for transitioning away from the co-sleeping.
Yeah. That stands out as more such a massive effort as opposed to breastfeeding. Yeah, it's weird that I hardly remember weaning her. Like, she survived.
She had food to eat.
Yeah. She was 18 months too. I feel like that was plenty.
It's hard to imagine how much of you is left for you when you have a baby growing in you and you're feeding another baby.
Yeah, like this is, and some people, find a space of abundance and all, it's just different for everyone. And for me, it was just exhausted with that.
Yeah. Did you feel supported in recognizing that you needed those changes to happen, and then also having support in acting on them, like in your relationship? Is that something that comes naturally to you, or is it easy?
I think so. Yeah. I think everything is kind of like, we wanted to get her out of our bed for a while, but it was hard and easier to like do what you're used to and get the most sleep that way. And then when it became that like very fixed need to change now, physically cannot do this anymore, then it was like, go, and I think Brendan and I meet each other at the point of transition naturally at a somewhat similar pace. So it's not the first time there's a request or like a need to like make a move about how we were operating. So yeah, I feel really grateful in terms of the partnership experience I've had in delving into making people.
That's huge.
I mean, it's everything.
Making people. Yeah.
It's hard to do without a good partner.
Yeah, it's everything.
What was your pregnancy like once you weaned? Were you pregnant when you also transitioned from co-sleeping? What was your pregnancy like once you got on the other side of those transitions and from being sick and all that?
Yeah. I was just so ready to, I'm much better with a newborn, even though that's hard, than with being pregnant. So I don't know if there was like so much of a memorable shift. It just felt like it was very like physically heavy to do it. It was a sacrifice. Pregnancy is a sacrifice.
Just getting through it for the next phase.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how it felt. And I think that there was a lot of, like, when I centered into like connecting with my baby and what that meant for our family, I felt really committed to the sacrifice. Like, I felt like all in that way, and also just very present with how uncomfortable it made me. So it was like a both and type of, which I think is mimicked a lot in the experience of being live, that like joy and sorrow or bedfellows. And
I feel like a lot of people feel like if they choose to make the sacrifice in regards to kids or being pregnant or something, that they feel like they can't complain because they made that choice, which is so wrong. Like, you can choose something and it can be really hard, and like you can talk about it.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
I'm right there deciding, I know I want another one, but I'm the same. I don't want to go through pregnancy again, or birth, really. But I like the way that you put that. It's a sacrifice. It is. How did you move past the fear, if you did at all, with the first one? The fear of being pregnant again and being a host for somebody in your body.
Yeah, I think I was thinking, I kind of tried to keep my head in the game since the first one was born. Like, Brendan always refers to how, like, shortly after my first child was born, I was like, only one more. Like, I was just orienting myself to the fact that it wasn't over, which I think is my way of like, keeping my head in the game and just being like, okay, like an athlete or something, to being like, there's going to be another season. And Yeah. And when I think of fear and pregnancy, I think so much of, well, not getting pregnant right away. And we had both of our kids with IUI, and both times we got pregnant the first time we tried IUI, which was a joy. And also leading up to finally moving to that measure took a while and was difficult and came with a lot of fear, I guess, around will this happen and what will it look like? And then also as an interracial couple, we talked from the beginning about what it meant to be a birthing Black woman. And yeah, the statistics around mortality for mothers and babies. And I feel like Serena Williams' story was a big story being shared of how economic status or any element of who that Black woman is still didn't protect her from a system that is got an intrinsic element of ignoring Black women and their experiences. And so much now that I've worked with nurses and have the reference of their stories and their experience with their education and the ways that the Black body was built into the medical educational experience with so much myth and inaccuracies and manipulative misfacts. So that was where a lot of my fear was like, or it originating. And we felt like we'd probably eventually get married, but it wasn't really a big thing in our minds until we had a kid, and I wanted someone to be able to legally like make decisions for me. So yeah, my fear with that led to a lot of the decisions around what I chose to happen at my birth and who was there. And that's how I mitigated that.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It adds such an extra layer of heaviness on making that choice.
Right.
That I can't even imagine.
And choosing where you want to give birth to and who, what kind of team you have. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's always important, but even more so.
Right. What route did you end up taking?
So yeah, I trained to be a doula and worked with infants in early childhood for like 15 years. So I had a huge birth community, and my close friend who is a midwife at a hospital, I planned for her to be my doula. We talked about how her being my midwife would be really intense, to be that close to someone and be responsible for possibly life and death decisions, but that her being a midwife willing to be a doula for the birth was like a way that we could be on each other, that she could be in the team and feel like it was good for her.
Was she also a Black woman? Mm-hmm. Was that important to you to have somebody?
100%, yeah.
Did she help you with finding the rest of your team?
So another friend of ours who's also in the labor and delivery, she's a labor and delivery nurse. The three of us were at the first birth. Those two women were my doulas, and we were all friends and all Black. And my nurse just happened to be Black that day. And it kind of felt like we broke the system. Like we banded together and had, in that regard, I felt like completely encircled. So that was a good plan.
Felt safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I felt like that element of racial discrimination in the healthcare system couldn't penetrate the way we built our team. And Brendan is also such an amazing ally and was prepared for all the things that he wouldn't know to be prepared for if it weren't for his effort in trying to learn what my experience might be. So that kind of sliced through that element of it. And then there's still the birth, like after all of that, which is the harshest reality of navigating racism in healthcare is that you're usually in healthcare to get some help. And before you're even at the point of why you're there, there's so much that needs to be mitigated to get the same access of care. So yeah, and my first birth, both of my births were pretty fast. They were like 7 7.5 hours.
That's what Garrett said. We had them over for dinner, and they were so fast. I'm like, don't tell me. I want to listen. I want to hear about it. Yeah.
Yeah, they were fast. The first one was just every 5 minutes I was having a contraction. So there was no early labor. There was no like build up. It was my water broke and then.
Wow.
And so that was relentless, and it felt traumatic in the way that it just never let me go.
Did you feel like it was harder to process in the moment because it was so intense and so fast?
Right.
Sometimes it's like it's over and then you're just like, what happened?
Yeah. No, I could not integrate. I kept being like, where's the slow part? Where's the moment that we couldn't even time contractions being any further apart than like 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes the whole time. So I did not have any space and the second one was just as fast, but in the beginning there was like 15 or 20 minutes between contractions, and that made all of the difference, even though it was still 7-ish hours, just to have
Take a
a
breath.
span of time to be like, this is happening.
Not just surviving like a storm.
Right.
From beginning to end.
Right.
Wow.
What was if you had any preparation for, like some people take trainings, you're a doula, you worked as a doula, so you've been at births before. So you knew a little bit more than the average person of what to expect
Yeah, we did a birth class. It's also like the partner's experience too. So even though I felt very clued in to birth space, it is a new thing to do it with somebody else. We had our birth class. I watched so many births and documentaries, and I listened to podcasts too. Birth Queens, I think it was called. Obsessively listening to birth stories, when you don't know what's going to happen, it's so hard to not want to hear what happened for as many people as possible and be like, I have 100 experiences in my head, I'm probably going to have referenced at least something, which ironically enough, no one had ever mentioned the word precipitous labor to me. A very fast first birth was not something I encountered in all of my research, not even a midwife. It's so rare that it's usually the opposite, that a first birth is much longer, much slower. So even with all of that, the one thing that I did not hear about at all until it happened to me happened.
Oh my gosh. Do you think that it would have given you like a tiny bit of peace of mind if you had heard about that?
I mean, I would have at least had a reference point, like know the page in the dictionary that's like, oh, this is what's,
Instead of just like, it sounds like you were just like, wait, this isn't right. Like it's hard. I feel like it's hard to stay in something and like survive it if part of your brain is trying to figure out like why it's happening.
Right.
So
you don't have
there's no way
other reference.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just another example that you can never be prepared enough. And for some people, being over prepared can be harder, but everybody's different. Yeah, we've talked to some people who like couldn't bring themselves to prepare at all because it was just too much. And yeah, everybody's so different in how they process things and how they prepare for things.
Yeah.
Did it feel different for your second birth when it was fast? I mean, of course it was different. You had more time.
We had this like little 2-hour window in the beginning of the second birth that we got to be in bed and labor a little bit at home. And I got a little peek of what a home birth would have been, which I would have loved to have and didn't feel like it was financially accessible for us in the right circumstance. There was a lot of parts of it that felt hard to access, but yeah, that 2 hours was, I think, really, really stabilizing. I got to integrate. I got to be like, it's happening. Although I didn't still believe it. I had the first labor pains and I was like, maybe it'll stop. Like it took a while. Part of that was because she was pretty early and I expected closer to my due date, like early by a couple of weeks. And my last one was right the day before my due date. So it's interesting how like little things that happen before you kind of expect to happen again, but every birth is different. But I liked those 2 hours.
Did you feel
which were kind of stressful in the sense that also we were told when we called our midwife that the hospital was on diversion. And
What does that mean?
it means that they're full.
Oh, okay.
And so we would have to just call a random
That doesn't
hospital.
make you feel good.
Oh my gosh.
Where are you going to go?
That's not comforting.
It's not. And so she was like, if you can labor at home at all and call us back in 2 hours, we'll see what I can do. And I was like, my people work there. So I was hoping that, but it wasn't guaranteed. And we did call the other hospital closest to us just to be like, we might have to come here. And I remember the person was like very nonchalant. Like she was like, oh, okay. I'm like, if I have to give birth, I can have my baby there. And she was like, oh yeah. And I was like,
not very reassuring.
Exactly. I was like, can you say more about how you feel confident that that's a good idea? It was just like awkwardly like disengaged in what I thought was pretty specifically,
I need to
a
know
bigger
if you're
information. Yeah.
I'm in labor right now.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, those 2 hours felt important for the circumstance with the hospital, and also ended up just being like, oh, this is a little bit of what early labor is like. And it did make me think like, oh yeah, had I had more of this, birth wouldn't have felt so oppressive. So
do you feel like your second birth helped you process your first birth a little bit?
yeah, I think maybe by talking about it now, I was comparing even how it was happening and getting a little bit of what I hoped to experience. I wanted a water birth both times. The first time there was no time, and the second time there were not enough folks to fill a tub because it was so busy at the hospital.
Oh.
So my water birth is like, c'est la vie.
But you did get to go to the hospital that you intended.
Yes, we did end up having space when we called back and we were ready.
Something must have happened in those 2 hours.
Yeah.
Even in labor, that's not even a long time. The 2 hours goes by so
Right.
fast.
Yeah, it does. Time is so warpy when you're in labor.
Were you sort of planning and anticipating your second birth being as fast as your first?
Yes, everybody was trying to be very honest after I felt like nobody told me before that it was most likely going to be as fast or faster, which was terrifying.
Yeah.
That sucked.
What sorts of things felt good to you during your labor?
I got to listen to an album. I played a Miriam Makeba album. She's a South African musician, an activist, and it was my favorite part of the labor. I also had a doula who was assigned through Healthy Birth Initiative, which is a awesome resource for Black birthing people in Portland, where you get a Black culturally specific nurse that follows your pregnancy and your postpartum for 2 years after you have your baby. So
That's great.
I got matched with my nurse, and there's lots of specific support that you get from that. And I got a doula through Black Parent Initiative who was there, and Annie, my friend who was the midwife doula from the first birth. So those two, and Brendan, and the three of them really had a vibe together. And I never felt like there was times where all three of them would be touching me, and I would imagine that would feel overwhelming, but they were very in sync with me and with each other, and it never did. So that was a real nice crew. Yeah, the music, the hour of contractions with that specific kind of sound was so beautiful. Yeah, it's such a powerful intensity to climb that hill and like want to get off, and you can. You're like, you hit those peaks of like trying to bargain with God to just make it happen some other way. It's so feels like being split open down the middle. So any moment that I can think back and feel like that was a sweet way to be held in it is really special. And I feel like the first birth, there is much more of a tone of feeling kind of panicked. Yeah.
Maybe you had that perspective of, I've done this before. I survived. Like, I get through some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it had some of that. little reference point by having done it, had a child. Yeah, I do remember that Brendan kept saying, "You got this." Like, it just became like the rote thing that kept coming out, and that was the only time that I was like, you cannot say that again. Like,
I don't have this.
I don't have
this. You're like, I'm holding on, but that's different.
Oh yeah, he had just said it. He didn't even like. He was just. It was his thing. It became his little mantra, and
Maybe
I was
it was
like,
more for him.
"The fuck
Got
out!"
this, you got
Yeah,
this.
totally.
When you listen back to that artist, if you have, does it bring you right back emotionally? Like, can you feel and like almost all the senses are heightened again?
That's interesting. I don't even know if I have heard that album again since my birth. It was only a few months ago.
You should play it right now.
I
Let's see when that comes
know.
up.
I would. And I've always loved that album, and it's in a different language, so it really kind of felt, even though I didn't speak the language, like the vocalizations feel really like familiar to me culturally, and so it was very expansive space to feel the language of birth, like something else that is like big and a part of me and different than me.
And like no other experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked that a lot.
But maybe we'll play some of it in the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go
I'll
listen
send
to
you
see
I'll
what.
send you the album.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, so we're kind of weaving throughout all these different parts. First birth, second birth. After you did deliver your kids, what was that like to see them for the first time? What did you also do with the 2-year-old while you were getting married? Where did she go?
I had a line of folks ready to help, and my closest friend came over at like 3 a.m, and my mom was scheduled to come in just a few days later, but she was early, so my mom changed her flight to come in the next day. So it was like my best friend and a little bit of the overnight, and then my mom came in the next day, and we stayed at the hospital that night. So she ended up having one night with my mom. So it worked out. But yeah, that was a definite another part of what it means to have birth, is juggling your other kid.
Yeah, where was your heart with leaving her? Had you left her for that amount of time yet?
Not without her dad. So yeah, but I didn't know. And also my mom's from out of town, but they do FaceTime a lot. So I knew she would know who she was. But she woke up and was like, what's going on? But she did okay. And I think knowing that like it kind of all happened in a great timing. Like, she woke up to my best friend, who she's really familiar with because she's around a lot. And then she was in bed. Like, Brendan went and spent time with her at the very end of the day, after I had already given birth, and was just like there with our newborn. He went home for dinner and put her to bed. And so then she woke up to my mom. So it was like a very ideal. Yeah.
Yeah, it must have given you peace.
Yeah.
To know that she's taken care of.
Yeah. So that was a variable that was definitely hard to plan for, that ended up being fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So then seeing your kids, what was that like?
Yeah. It's like visiting another world. It feels like what it would feel like to step foot on Pluto or something. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Everything is forever changed by this new life, and trying to orient to being separate from them, but not really. Those early moments of being not pregnant, like the first 20 minutes of being like, oh my God, I'm not pregnant after 9 months I remember that a lot.
Yeah. So much weight at one point is just not there anymore.
Right. And it was real, because I'm not a pregnant person's pregnant person. Like, I don't enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I was very confused at the next month after my second baby, when I was very kind of saddened to be like, oh, this isn't going to happen again. And having like, are you sure? And I was like, who the hell are you? It was really the drugs of the hormones were definitely playing me. And I was really surprised with having a sort of melancholy about it being over.
It's like reflecting on a closed chapter
Yeah.
that you wouldn't want to do again. But
Right.
It's like, but never again is never again.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like in the moment you're living everything for the last time.
Right.
Once you process that, it wouldn't happen again. Did you find the joy in like not having to keep your head in that game anymore?
I think I definitely am glad that I'm not gonna have a physical another pregnancy. So yeah, it's still so fresh.
Yeah.
So
Still
I'm
processing.
like orienting to all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, how did you experience those first couple of months with all the hormones and recovery and just the major adjustment?
I feel like we have had a pretty wonderful integration period. Both pregnancies, my body physically recovered really quickly. I had some hair loss that was hard the first time. Other than that, there wasn't a lot of physical discomfort, which was a blessing because you're so nonstop. Like the second just means that the in between moments that you had small breaks are not breaks anymore. And that's the consistent having to be present for every need that doesn't stop from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed part is just like, oh my God, like people have more kids. And so, yeah, that constant moving has been like getting into double Dutch jump rope where you're like, okay, and now we just do this? Really? Like we don't stop? Really? Like it just feels like we're just on it. And there's been a big like work transition happening for me and kind of for Brendan. So there's all of this, how's it all going to settle? What does childcare look like? I mean, this country just has us in a chokehold with the expense of childcare. And with 2 kids, it feels impossible. So there's so much that has yet to like fully pan out in terms of how to sustain this pace. Yeah.
There's no way for anyone to prepare for childcare, like no matter what your means are, like there's just not enough of it. But then, of course, like the expense is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Compared to income. It's just it's
I think it's more than rent now. I think some article came out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. With 2 kids, it's hovering around like $4,000, $4,200 a month. That's like many bills, including a mortgage.
That's like a good income if you spent your entire income on just that.
Right.
It's wild.
It's so, yeah. And you have to either be really struggling to have any sort of like public resource or anywhere in the mid-range. It's like,
good luck.
Figure it out.
For a lot of people just can't work because
right, you can't afford to go to work. What a statement.
That's so ridiculous.
You can't afford to have a job.
Yeah. Do you want kids or do you want a job?
The adjustment I think it's
You're
a
in
constant
it still.
yeah.
How do you balance everything? Thinking about work projects, thinking about 2 kids' needs, a relationship needs, a household.
Hell if I know.
What's your formula? Do you have anything?
I mean, I think that
What's the magic?
Brendan and I's relationship sits at the centerpiece of what makes everything go. Like if your teammate doesn't have the capacity to like be in it fully, it makes it much, I can't imagine. So
which is so common.
That is so anchoring, which is so common. Exactly. So I'm so grateful that is the case. And then there's a shift that I don't know about yet. I don't know what my next work experience is going to be. So the reality of working with 2 kids hasn't landed. And so I have a lot of anticipation and kind of confusion and fear and yeah, like, wait, how do I do that? But it will some way it's it's just to kind of wait and see. I also nannied for so long that I have the resource of taking care of 2 children for decades, like a really long time.
But then you don't get a break when
But
it's
you
your
don't get a
kids.
break when it's your kid, and
You're
your
not paid for your
emotional,
work.
like the way they are with you
It's very
is so
different,
different
yeah.
than when you're the nanny as opposed to when you're the mom.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
It's hugely different. Yeah.
I was a nanny for a long time, and pretty often I would leave right at witching hour and just be like, good luck.
Right. Bye-bye.
Gonna go home.
Yeah. You can't tap out when you're a parent.
Right.
It's like just another example of like, I feel like you said it so well on like how society just doesn't set us up for any of this. And it's like, you can't even really process this like huge thing you went through of like being pregnant, giving birth, doing it twice. It's like you don't even have time to like get on the other side of that and process it because you're like in it still. Like you're in postpartum, you're having a toddler, you have to figure out, not knowing what the future is with childcare. It's like the plates are always spinning. Like,
Right.
You can't just like put them down to process. It's a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
How was bringing your second child home and introducing her?
It was super sweet. Zaharia immediately got on her knees in front of the car seat and pulled the blanket back and was just like, let me look at this person. And having her know that her baby sister was in my belly for so long and seeing her trying to be like, she came out was just beautiful to watch her process. Like, oh, wow, this is different. And she was like, she's a very social person, I feel. She likes people around, so she was welcoming. And yeah, then the next month or so, the real like emotional integration of like sharing your parents and sharing the space and she's here to stay and all of that started to show up and just, yeah, sort of a regression around how she gets attention. But it was never directly directed at her sister. Like she's always like, I love you, you're super cute, but also like, I'm gonna go start some shit and like stir things up to get my needs met. It's not personal.
Yeah, she's still moving through the frustration.
Yeah.
That's nice that she loves her so much. I had a client whose toddler was like, after like 6 or 7 weeks, was like, okay, when's the baby going back now? Like, that's enough sharing.
Are you still co-sleeping with the new one?
So Avani is most happy sleeping in her car seat. And we can't fully figure out what she doesn't like about lying flat. Part of it I realized recently is the sheets that she had, which is like the bougiest baby thing ever. But she very much doesn't like silk sheets. Which I got for her hair. Like, what the fuck?
They can be oddly particular.
Yeah. So she's like in the side sleeper with her car seat in it sometimes. Most of the time. And our pediatrician is just like, I mean, basically this time period where she's at 12 weeks is when she was like, you can make an adjustment then. But if that's how she likes to be, it's fine. And so we're like, okay.
Just doing
if
what
it
you
works,
need to do.
just keep doing that. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's such a funny image. Just in the car seat and the side sleeper next to the bed.
Totally.
And
I've seen that
baby
one.
sleeping in there.
That's her life right now.
Does Zaharia want to come back into bed with you all now that it's the three of you in there?
No, she's very much like her crib is her space now.
Yeah.
We did the Battelle. You heard of Battelle? It's a sleep training program. You can pay people to guide you through getting them into their own room, and they they use a ring cam to actually like watch your nights with you in the beginning, and they give you a method, and they're like your team getting you
like
through it.
having these like strangers watch you sleep?
Well, So they basically hop on if you like text them in the middle of the night and you're like, I'm in a moment and she's freaking out. And then they'll be like, okay, let me see what's happening. So it's not like they're watching every moment.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
That is
I've
interesting.
never heard about that.
I haven't heard about that.
It
either.
was, yeah, when I was looking up help, that was one of the ones I found. And that's what we did. And it worked eventually, which was like, really, it was really hard. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And Ivani now, like, I would say 20% of the time, like most mornings, she ends up like swaddled next to me. So she just doesn't like being in the side sleeper. I feel like she would lay flat in bed longer, but she still can't. If her arms aren't swaddled, she just like rubs her face awake and can't handle not being swaddled yet. So it's kind of a weird co-sleeping in between the car seat, the co-sleeper, and the mattress.
Yeah. Is Zaharia potty trained? Are you? Where are you on that journey?
She is ready to be and has no problem like going, but we haven't like gone full speed ahead. So, and she's almost 2.5. So I feel right.
Why haven't you figured that out while you're in postpartum?
3-4 months.
You can manage all of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot.
I keep telling Johnny, like, Ruby has to be potty trained before we introduce another. I need the full, like, infancy stage to be, I don't have it in me.
Yeah, that's fair.
That concludes part 1 with Rashida. Stay tuned for part 2 on October 16th, where we hear more of Rashida's story, including her experience navigating postpartum, particularly as a Black woman with mixed-race children.
Bearing Birth is available on all major podcast streaming services. We invite you to subscribe as well as follow us on Instagram at Bearing Birth Podcast.